All right, another one of the Homeric Rhapsody things. We're up to what we know as Book 7 now, which is having finished Hector and Paris returning from the city back into the battlefield. Here we go. Sing, goddess, of that time when great shining-helmed Hector and Paris of that horn bow returned to the battlefield, only to have gods intervene and stop that deadly, furious fighting. Those two brothers had come back, sprinting to that field, seeing their men fighting closer to the city than before they were. Paris soon sighted a man, Alastor, the attendant to Odysseus, and he aimed with his shining, iron-pointed spear, a spear-like arrow, and he drew back that bow to his chin and fired. It was not badly aimed. It struck the man directly between the bridge of the nose and the eye, going straight into the socket where the eye was least, and it sprung there like a flower that stands tall in the field as the sun beats down on it and the rain feeds it, and it grows strong. That arrow with its fletching stood there like a flower, and the man himself fell crashing down to the earth, allowing the arrow to stick straight up like that flower in the field. Odysseus was wroth at the slaying of his comrade, and he took up his spear, and he cast at the first Trojan he could find, not knowing who had shot the deadly shaft. It was Chromius that he found. He cast that spear as strong as he could, praying to Athena thereby, and it did not miss. The man had raised his targe, that shield covered with a layer of bull's hide, but it was not enough to stop that fury of a man and a god together. That bronze spear went straight through the hide, and the bronze of the shield punching through it, and straight through the arm that held it, right into the man's chest, where his ribs met, crashing through the bone and making so that those ribs were shattered within him. His armor, that armor that had so well protected his flesh until now, was like nothing, was like a reed on the side of the riverbed or a piece of seaweed in the ocean floor, for all the good it did to protect him from that spear. Nothing could have stopped that fury of Athena, save but another god's might. But the gods did not smile upon you that day, Chromius, and you fell crashing to the dust, gasping out your life as the blood seeped into that brown earth. Thereby the Trojans fell back a little space, seeing that God-given fury and knowing it for what it must have been. Another Trojan, Echemon, took up his spear and thrust into the crowd toward Odysseus, wroth for the man Chromius that he had shared bread and meat and wine with on so many days in their siege conditions under the city of Troy. He cast and thrust his spear at Odysseus' shield, but never could it break through that hard bronze, for he was still protected by his goddess, who sought to keep him safe for other things that were in store, both good and bad, but all which would build his character and make him the better for it in the end. So did the man have no way to break through that shield, and nor could he pierce the man's flesh. Odysseus, seeing the opening, took up his spear and thrust, and that went straight over the man's shield into his jawbone, crunching the teeth and shattering the jaw. The man fell before he could even move his weapon, or before he knew what was upon him. Odysseus' spear had wrenched forth within the man's head, not coming back the other way, and it took him a few tries with his foot on the chest of his prey to take that spear back forth, and thus it had carried bits of the jaw with it as he continued fighting. And all the Trojans saw that deadly spear, horrifying, with a human jaw attached to it, and stepped back from the man even further, knowing him for the deadly fighter he was, and the gods' favorite that they all knew him to be. Thus the fighting had been so furious, with Athena at the side of Odysseus, and with great Zeus fueling on the Trojans. All these had been fighting with the fury of 1,000 men and 1,000 cries, all ringing across the battlefield. And thus the gods had decided that something must be done. All right, got a little, couldn't figure out what to say at the end there to close it out, but not so bad. I don't know what specifically happens in this part, or I can't remember at least. We're trying to get to a point where Ares and Athena consider it to be so deadly, or maybe it's Apollo and Athena, I don't remember. One of the Trojan favoring gods and Athena decide that it's so deadly that they need to stop the combat. And so I just made up some scenes with, people getting killed more and more brutally. The Iliad, it's interesting because it doesn't necessarily go into like how many guys are getting killed at any given time. It's more like the more gruesome the kills are, that represents more guys getting killed, if that makes sense. It's kind of like in like a Total War game where you see like just the one guy who's like the commander of the army standing on the battlefield, but then above it has, the number of soldiers that he has or whatever, but there's not more than one guy unless you have more than one commander. Or similarly, like in, and maybe I'm just thinking a lot about Troy Total War because I've been playing it a lot, but when you finish a battle and then how, like, they do that little thing where they fight in single combat at the end, and like if he chops the guy's head off, that means it was like more of a victory than if they just like clash and one of them is a little bit tired looking. So it's kind of like, it won't say, there'll be parts where it says like he killed this guy and that guy and that guy, but only like 4 guys or maybe like a handful. But there's no indication of like, 1,000 men fell that day or whatever, not 1,000, but however many. There's nothing like that, but it does, there are parts where it gets to be extremely graphic in the way that the kills happen. And I've always interpreted that as meaning that is supposed to represent that the fighting in general is growing to be more fierce, and that there's more men falling in that part than if the guys are just dying in regular ways, relatively speaking. And so that's what I'm trying to do here, where this one, all 3 of the kills were pretty like specific and like really gruesome, or as much as I could do at least. And it's supposed to represent the kind of the fighting getting pretty intense. I don't know, I'm still not very good at coming up with like backstories for the characters. I'm mostly just describing what happens to them. But the thing that Homer makes him really great is that he also imbues the person who is being killed at the last moment as they're already been killed. So that they're dead already. And then you learn about like, some moment where he had just been married and his wife would, live in this empty house that they built together, half finished, for the rest of her life or something, or that his mother would never get to close his eyes because he wouldn't return from the battlefield and he'd be eaten by dogs or whatever. So that pathos that you get from that, I need to put more stuff like that in there because I know a lot of it. Obviously, I said a few of them right then, but I seem to be doing more action-oriented moments where I'm not inserting the as much of that other stuff as I could. I did add a couple of interesting little Homeric similes, and I was kind of happy about that because it might have been one of the only Homeric similes that I've done that's not equivalent to one that already exists in what we know as the Iliad, where Paris shoots a guy into this part of the eye socket with an arrow, and the fletching coming out of this thing, out of the back of the arrow that's sticking out of his head, is like a flower that's growing strong on the plain, or in a bed of flowers or whatever. That was kind of pretty decent as far as like doing something that's like a Homeric simile. It was a little disjointed when the guy fell and then he falls like this, so the flower's sticking up, and I thought that was like the more like a flower sitting in the field, and then I kind of like added another thing about it, which is not really something Homer would do, but overall not so bad. We'll just keep practicing and keep going. Cool.